A warning, if any of you all are thinking of watching Ertugrul, this is a
Kind of like a
very,
lifetime commitment.
it's a lifetime commitment. There's a serious number of episodes.
Today on Mind Matters, we're going to talk about stories, specifically modern narratives that we can find in TV, movies, novels too. There's a tendency to depict what I'd call the dark aspects of human nature, and of course that can provide for some great material. But sometimes I think the darkness kind of overshadows the light, and what I mean specifically by that is what I see as an extreme cynicism in the portrayal of just humans and characters that we see in the movies. And it's not just cynicism and this kind of darkness. There's also a trend to what I'd consider relatively one-dimensional or two-dimensional characters with very shallow emotions, shallow characters, shallow personalities. Now, this isn't true across the board. There are plenty of great characters if you look for them, but still there seems to be a trend over the past 5-10 years, I don't know, maybe longer, that I think is rooted partly in just the attempt for higher and higher degrees of realism, because we don't want to present like rosy, perfect people. We want to show them with all their flaws and make them totally human, right? Totally relatable, even though really most characters that you see in movies and TV shows aren't relatable at all. They're usually in entirely different circumstances, and you're looking at some of the most beautiful people on the face of the planet. So there's this weird kind of disconnect where characters are supposed to be relatable, but at the same time there's something about them that is unattainable. On the one hand, they're not supposed to be that one in a million person. What I mean by that, like let's say like a hero, a person with a really strong character, like one of those people that is just the kind of the admiration of everyone that knows him or her. That's a very rare person. So they say, well, those people are rare. We don't want to show those people. We want to show real people with very apparent flaws. But they're showing them, again, with a Hollywood actor who is also a one in a million in a different category. So you have these primarily extremely beautiful people playing extremely flawed characters or just shallow characters that don't really have much depth to them. So it makes for a weird combination. But the main thing that strikes me is that kind of those two features. There is this cynical, it's realism bordering on cynicism, that kind of humans are total crap and with no redeeming qualities, but when there are redeeming qualities, they're not, I wouldn't say they're really very often redeeming. It's more of just like, it's more of the superhero variety where you have a heroic character who really has the depth of a shallow like puddle that you'd step in going to work. But did you want to say something, Larry?
Well, I was just thinking thimble. But the problem with the representation of heroes in cinema and in fiction and in TV shows would seem to be that they are these unattainable figures that are outside of the realm of what we would normally experience in terms of interacting with normal people. By the same token, the hero is this archetype after all, and is the hero precisely because this figure or character has aspired to presumably fighting evil and injustice on another level, which elevates their being, or should elevate their being to our experience of them in the story. And if they're not exactly relatable in most of the normal ways, then they become these figures to aspire to in their courage, in their perspectives, in their ability to see the larger picture that perhaps those characters that they're surrounded by don't see. And along these lines, we've recently, or not so recently, have come across a program, a Turkish television show called Dirilis Ertugrul, which is a program that has pretty much taken the Islamic world and Pakistan and other countries of Asia by storm. And it's a historical drama, a heroic journey, if you will, that follows this character, Ertugrul, who lives in the 13th century and is the head of, or one of the heads of a tribe of Turkish nomads and herdsmen who recognizes all of the injustice that's being perpetrated on his tribe and other tribes in the form of crusaders and Mongols and even characters within his own tribe who are aspiring to positions of power and who are ruthless in their deceptions and in their attempts to gain power at the expense of everyone around them. And we've been watching this program for some time now. It is, I think, successful in our minds, not because we identify with the espoused religion, Islam, per se, but that Islam has become, in the context of this show and the values that are kind of conveyed through it, a almost universal value, which is tradition and protecting one's own and serving justice and fighting for those who are being oppressed by these incredibly dark forces that are constantly encroaching on the group. So that's a little bit of an introduction. We could say more about that and what we like about the show.
Well, there's like you were saying, there's a whole lot of good that it does, and to go into what Harrison was talking about as a juxtaposition of Ertugrul against the backdrop of Western cinema. It's very different in a lot of like in cultural aspects, but also just in the value system. Like they don't go into the cynical, like, I don't know if it's a postmodernist thing, like if that's being the driving influence in Western cinema or if it's something else. But instead of having the hyper realism bordering on cynicism as kind of like the backdrop of the story is about truth, and it's about seeking truth and staying on the righteous path, and that's kind of the whole struggle of Ertugrul and his tribesmen, is trying to stay on the righteous path to relieve the suffering of the oppressed, who are being oppressed by these Mongolians and Templars and even other Muslims who are just trying to seek power for their own sake, even though like they'll also say, I like how they do this. They'll, like, each of the bad guys, like each one of them has essentially like said, I want this power, but then they'll also be like, because it's for the good of, the tribe. It's for the good
For
of
the greater good.
For the greater good, I must be in total power and, rule over everyone because I'm great and wonderful and it'll be good for everyone, when really it's just, it's all about themselves. But they still pay lip service to this greater good, which is what, leaders are supposed to be doing, is seeking to do the greater good.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an interesting contrast, and I think it's really good, and it works really well because it is, like James Corbett was saying, the most powerful weapon in the world is narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really true. And I think it really shows through in Ertugrul, because he has this story and this narrative of how he really is, and he does believe it because he's sacrificing like his own ego and everything else to try and do what's best for his tribe and his clansmen and for the Turkmen, the greater Turkmen tribes of the area.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's great, and you should totally watch it.
Yeah. I want to relate this back to this trend in the Western narratives. I think, like I said right at the top, I don't have anything against this cynicism, like per se, or the hyperrealism. Like I love a show like The Wire, for instance. I thought it was really well done. But what I think is there's an imbalance going on, because on the one hand you have this hyperrealism looking at all of the, like, it's almost like a telescopic or microscopic view of human flaws, essentially, and all the things that are wrong with us. And I think that can serve a purpose. And within a story like that, where you have these totally flawed characters, when they make a good choice, that's like a mini moment of heroism, and that's a good thing. And it's fun to watch. It's enjoyable to watch. Like there are moments where you experience this inner uplifting and like release of emotion that wouldn't happen without those circumstances to set it up.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, I think every culture also needs like a highly idealized story. And in the Western world, what we have for those these days is comic book movies with superheroes. And even though pretty much all the big blockbusters are Hollywood superhero movies, and dozens of them come out a year, it seems like, those are the ones I'd categorize as extremely shallow. Even the heroic characters in them, they're kind of like shells of human beings. They're just kind of like placeholders. They're cardboard cutouts. I might lose some likes for saying it, but I really don't like most of the Marvel movies. Like I think they're kind of enjoyable as like some of them as like popcorn entertainment, but I think most of the characters are total crap, except the just like nerd aside, the ones I do like are actually the comedy ones, the more funny ones, like Guardians of the Galaxy, because, well, I think those characters work better in a humorous or in a comedic setting, because when you try to put them in serious situations, like in a lot of the Marvel movies, like the Avengers movies, you have these ridiculous characters trying to act like serious human beings, and it just doesn't work because they're ridiculous superheroes. And their biggest emotional conflicts are like, oh, something's in my way and I can't get what I want, so now I'm sad. I'm sad superhero now, and I'm depressed, sad, mad superhero. And then the conflict, then the obstacle gets moved away, and now they're flexing their arms and they're all doing their thing. And that's pretty much the extent of the conflict. There's nothing. There are no actually like deep emotional things going on with these characters. They pretty much have some contrived obstacle in front of them, and that's their conflict, and that's it. Which doesn't really lead to any kind of it doesn't lead to that uplifting feeling. I mean, the most uplifting feeling I get watching a superhero movie is just like it maybe like a well shot battle scene where things, well, and most of them aren't even well shot, but it's like, oh, there's it looks like a comic book. Oh, they're well framed, and they're all moving and doing this choreographed move, and it's fun to look at, but there's nothing really to it. There aren't really any stakes. And so we have this imbalance with the hyper focused cynicism and flawed human nature next to this idealized but stereotyped and shallow portrayal of an ideal, of a hero, and whatever positives in the cynicism, in the cynical view, aren't balanced out by the positives in the heroic view, because the heroes are not really heroes. Whereas if you look at like what I think is one of the greatest like heroes in all of literature is like Odysseus.
Mhm.
And Odysseus is like well, first of all, he's a total badass, and but he's totally human at the same time. You see his flaws, but you also see his depth, and you see the conflicts and the sacrifices and his craftiness, and he's got so many qualities and characteristics and features, and at the same time he is a superhero. Like the science fiction author Dan Simmons wrote this his kind of version of the Iliad and the Odyssey called Ilium and Olympus, and Odysseus plays a role in there, and he's a character, and he's just a total badass. Like, he's a great character. But so we had that, like, or there have been, Western civilization is kind of like, amalgamated and taken over, ancient Greek, like tropes and characters and all that stuff. But we haven't really followed through on the promise of that. And I'm not saying it's been like that for thousands of years, because we have had great stories and great, and real heroes, but they seem to be lacking today. So coming back to Ertugrul, there's something there that is lacking, because one way of putting this, we talked about Robin Collingwood in previous shows, a British philosopher, and he's got a book called The Principles of Art, which I quoted on a previous show, where he's one of my favorite philosophers, just because he's a great thinker, and I like the way he breaks things down. But in his study on art, he basically wants to define what is art and what isn't art. And he ends up, after hundreds of pages of hard thinking, he breaks down what the categories of what people might ordinarily consider art into different things. One art, is of course the one he's defining, but he distinguishes that from something he calls magic, I believe. And magic would be like fairy tales and myths and legends. And that is the category into which I think superheroes should fit, but I don't think they're fulfilling the role that they should in a culture. Then you look at Ertugrul, and I think that Ertugrul fulfills that. He's kind of like the King Arthur or the Odysseus of like present-day Turkish culture. And I say present-day Turkish culture because I'm talking about Ertugrul in this TV show. Because of course there are legends about the real Ertugrul, but no one really knows much, if anything, concrete about the real Ertugrul, who lived 800 years ago.
He's been mythologized. Yeah,
he's been totally mythologized. So I think the first legends of Ertugrul were only written like 200 years after his death or something like that. So it's pretty much, and they utilize some of those legends from the official sources from those 200 years later in creating the narrative of this show. But it really is, Ertugrul in this show really is entirely the creation of the writers of the show. So they've got a free hand to pretty much do whatever they want with him, and to create like a totally awesome, badass character who checks all the boxes of what a hero should be. And that is, I think, well, I don't know if that's why we don't lack a hero. We just, the people that should be tasked with that role in English-speaking culture just haven't managed to do so. Maybe because they don't think it's worthwhile. Like, this is where postmodernism might come into play. Well, one of the reasons I'm going to go on a little sidebar here about modern writers.
Maybe before you do that, Harrison, because you made a lot of good observations there that I would just like to flesh out a little bit before the sidebar gets pursued. Mm-hmm. And that is that, like, you're talking about these superhero genre of movies, and the Marvel movies in particular. And I would just add that it's all about the spectacle. All of the character developments that we see in these movies are all designed or written to facilitate the big action sequence, which is fun as far as it goes, but has the depth of a thimble. It's kind of like cotton candy. I mean, it's good for about 3 seconds, and then the empty calories set in, and you can't take much of anything away from it, except perhaps the visual or how cool that looked. You mentioned the Odyssey and the Iliad in particular, and one of the most impressive features to me about those books is the intervention or interaction of the gods with Odysseus and the main characters. The gods were interacting. Pallas Athene is on Odysseus's side, and despite all of his travails, and he goes through a number of journeys and struggles. I mean, at one point he's on the island of I forget the name of the island, but he's basically seduced by one of the characters there, and he's there for 10 years trying to get back home to his wife and son. But Pallas Athene is constantly in the background, doing what she can to facilitate his journey and what's in him to do. And similar to Ertugrul, something we haven't really gotten into yet is his fascinating interaction with Ibn Arabi, which is just an interesting backstory here. When we were researching the Unlimited Mercifier, Stephen Hurtenstein's book about Ibn Arabi some months ago, Harrison, you were looking for YouTube information on Ibn Arabi, and that's how we came across Ertugrul, because there was this little dramatization. So you have this great mystic spiritual figure, Ibn Arabi, who has no small part to play in Ertugrul's journey. He is this kind of intermediary, this holy assistant to Ertugrul.
It's like his Merlin.
Yes, that's a good analogy. And there is through Ertugrul's humility, through his prayers, through his struggles, that sometimes get answered quite directly by Ibn Arabi's assistance, through Ibn Arabi's prayers, through his asking the universe for assistance to Ertugrul. There again, like the Odyssey, is this faith in the hierarchy of spiritual value, that there are things above the individual hero that he relies upon for assistance. And this kind of goes against a lot of the spectacle that we see, in the sense that, everything is reduced to the powers and the will that Iron Man has in his costume and his will to do right, or any of the other characters. There is no kind of cosmic connection, if you will, that is demonstrated so well and so dramatically in this particular program, and that might be part of his superheroism, the fact that he is willing to has to acknowledge the fact that he can't do it alone, that there are forces at work that he's hoping to be assisted by, that he's put his faith into, that help him to carry his mission forward, which is to fight injustice. And it's also one of the reasons why, in the context of the stories, how he's able to see the machinations of those around him far earlier and with much greater vision than any of the surrounding characters. And he's burdened with this responsibility, but he takes it on because he can't, with his intuition, completely explain how it is that he understands things and the people that are plotting against his tribe and against the larger Islamic world in the story. But because he's the hero, he will act as much as possible on his understanding, and even at the expense of, the way that others around him, his family, for instance, and his tribe perceive him, like, oh, Ertugrul is off doing his own thing again, and these are, the responses, which are quite normal in a sense. If you're looking from a distance at what Ertugrul's doing and you don't quite understand his vision, his bravery, his intelligence, they're great kind of dramatic devices to convey just one of the many types of struggles that this character has to face within himself as he continues forward. And you might make an analogy, if you will, of anybody who's looking at any of the major kinds of world events and issues that we're looking at today. Of course, we have a bias. We think we're right about certain things. But I propose that there is a little bit of heroism in anybody who's willing to, in their own way, stand up for certain, for truth and understanding in what is a sea, a morass of lies and injustice that's being encroached upon many millions of people right now.
I think, not to delay the sidebar, but I think you bring up an interesting point, and that is that Ertugrul is a religious man, and that's part of where the calling comes from for him. Like, what's the point of fighting injustice? Like, who cares? What's the point? Well, it's because it's, a dictate from God. God is calling him to fight for the oppressed.
He's on a mission from Gad.
And it's like, I could be totally wrong here, but it doesn't seem like God exists in Western cinema.
Yeah.
By and large.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the point? And it totally makes sense now. Like, why, this kind of fervor for truth isn't really seen in the West because God is dead here. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a real shame for a number of reasons, not the least of which is because, like, without God, there's no reason to, fight for the oppressed and seek truth and justice and so on. So, yeah, I thought that was a really interesting point to kind of explain why there haven't been really good, deep heroes in the West, mm-hmm. because they don't have that the higher powers,
yeah,
calling to them.
I think that's why Lord of the Rings and Star Wars are successful, is that they may not, they're fantasies, but they incorporate that in their own ways. Of course, in Lord of the Rings, there's a whole mythology that Tolkien created for it, and in Star Wars, you've got the Force. So just like Ibn Arabi might be Ertugrul's Merlin, he could also be his Yoda. This saintly being that has supernatural powers. So bringing in this element, this fantastical element, but which for a religious person is actually part of their worldview, part of their reality, that the supernatural things like this do exist and do happen. That's of course totally rejected by the mindset, by the postmodern, by the materialist mindset, and that's prevalent today, which is a detriment to even our works of science fiction and fantasy, where such things can be implemented. I mean, even Dune manages to do it manages to do it, Frank Herbert, in a manner that's it's still science-y, right? It's a science fiction novel, but there's this element of otherworldliness to that story, and that will be one of the reasons why Ertugrul works. That's another thing I want to talk about, but first I'll do the sidebar. I want to talk about the characters in Ertugrul, first of all. Compared to characters in Western media. One of the things that I don't like about most modern Western stories is the villains, either the villains or the lack of villains, because the villains are either just boring evil, which is just kind of evil for the sake of being evil, but not really scary evil, because evil should be terrifying. Like a true villain should be terrifying, kind of like Hannibal Lecter. Like Hannibal Lecter's a scary dude. In Silence of the Lambs, which we watched recently. But I'll talk about the lack of villains, because there's a tendency to portray a character as evil, as a bad guy, and then do the switcheroo on you, right? So this happened in the latest season of the Haunting series. There was the Haunting of Hill House, and then there's the Haunting of Bly Manor. So they portray this one character as like just this really devious Machiavellian guy, and then in one episode, all of a sudden, boom, oh, here he is, and here's why he's so bad. Here's the bad things that happened to him. He was so mistreated by his dad, and that's what made him this way.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking about it afterwards, and just how I think it shows just how little psychological insight most people have, or maybe not most people, how most Hollywood writers, how little psychological insight most Hollywood writers have. Because, yeah, a bad childhood can do things to a person and screw them up in many ways, but it doesn't turn them into a psychopath. I'm talking specifically about the psychopath as a diagnosable personality disorder. They have particular personality characteristics that can't be created in a regular abused or traumatized person. So when you portray a character as a psychopath and then you pull the switcheroo on them, on the audience, it's totally unbelievable. But for a lot of these writers and for a lot of people watching it, it is believable because they only know it from watching TV and from watching movies. They don't know what the varieties of human beings are actually like in the real world. Or if they do, they can see through it because a lot of people have had an interaction with a psychopath. But going back in the other direction again, the negative influence of these dramatizations is that if you have encountered a psychopath in real life, now you may be more willing to follow the psychopath's manipulations by believing him when he says, "Oh, it was just my bad childhood that made me this way," when really there's not. He's pretty much just a soulless individual. There's nothing there. There's nothing that made him that way from his childhood. I mean, that's pretty much just the way he was born. Since childhood. I haven't watched it yet, but Jordan Peterson has recommended it, so I'm going to check it out. The novel and movie called We Need to Talk About Kevin, which is apparently a story about a psychopathic child, which of course is a controversial topic. We're not going to get into that, but basically psychopaths are psychopaths since the time that they were children, and parents, parenting styles will not make a difference one way or the other. It may influence what kind of psychopath they're going to be, whether they're like a street criminal versus a white collar criminal, but it's not going to change their personality structure. So, summarizing that point, when we have an evil character, there's this tendency among writers to give them some depth. The actor's asking, "Oh, what's my motivation? Oh, well, here's your motivation. I'm gonna write you the best motivation, right?" And it turns out to be total crap. But part of that is because who are the type of people that write stories, that write these Hollywood things? They're open, people who are open on that personality dimension of the big five. They've got open personalities. They want to look. They want to look deeply. They want to find the reasons. They don't want to just see the surface narrative. They want to get into that nitty gritty. So they create these stories. They in their imagination and through their creativity, they're the ones that will look at a person and say, "Oh, well, what could have made him that way?" And they'll come up with a story, a narrative to do that. Whereas someone who isn't very, very high on openness, they're not going to be writing stories because it's a waste of time. At least that's the way they see it. And they're just going to say, "That guy's just a son of a bitch. That guy's just an evil asshole." And that's that, right? So there are benefits to both sides, but you're not going to get those guys writing stories. The people writing the stories are the people that are going to be trying to look for the sympathetic, what do you call it? The
wounded child.
Yeah, the wounded child within the rough exterior, right? The beauty in the beast. And oftentimes it just doesn't work. And then so you've got that, and then you've got the shallow evil superhero villains that just aren't very charismatic and are just placeholders for here's your evil supervillain. And those are pretty much your options. You don't have very many. There are a few.
Like Joker.
Yeah,
and the Dark
Joker's
Knight.
great.
Yeah.
And of course both Jokers are great. But few and far between to actually find those. So when you actually go to a more cheesy format, you might say, or just like you can find depictions of evil, like stereotyped depictions of evil that are actually really good because there are people like that. So that's what you get with Ertugrul, because I'd call Ertugrul, it's half Game of Thrones, half Young and the Restless. Because it's like a family show. It's designed and written to be watchable by the whole family. So it's PG, and it's kind of funny because I guess this is Turkish censorship requirements, almost, but not all, of like the wounds, even if it's just like this little cut, the blood is blurred out. So whenever there's like a wound, whether it's even just I've noticed in recent episodes, it could just be blood. Even if it's like a bloody dish from the doctor who's wiping a wound, the bloody dish, like the bloody water in the dish will be blurred out, or it can be like this giant gaping wound or this pustule or something. Like that's the kind of show you're watching, right? So you're not going to be getting gore, the levels of which you'll find in like Game of Thrones or something. There's no nudity, there's no sex. It's a family show, so there's lots of fighting, lots of killing, of course, but it's kind of stylized. It's not super realistic, but there's this Young and the Restless element where you see all the dynamics going on in this tribe. You see the family dynamics. You see the dynamics between like the fights and the conflicts in relationships and between people in the tribe. And so you get all of this entire microcosm of life, essentially. So that's one of the great things about the show, is that it's got everything in it. It's got family, it's got conflict, it's got inter-tribe conflict, it's got politics, it's got spies and wars and scheming and conspiracies and all this stuff.
And lions and tigers and bears.
Yes, yeah, it's got everything. It's got 100 bad guys with swords. It's got all of this stuff, and within this, like Ilan was saying, you have the villains. You've got either the evil, Mongols or Crusaders, but within the Mongols and Crusaders, you have some characters who you have that attempt at almost hyper-realism, but it's not hyper-realism, it's just realism. You have sympathetic characters in all these camps, even if, for the most part, the bad guys are bad guys, right? So, you've got the evil Crusaders, and most of them are evil, some humorously so. But you do have some complex characters, and even likable and respectable characters, even if they're villains. You can see where they're coming from, even if you don't agree with them. So it's actually basically it's just got good characters. But you also mentioned the villains within the tribe. So it's not just baddies on the outside that you're fighting against. There are, like in any group, you've got the people within who are evil. This is why I praise it for its realism in this department, is that there's always someone within your own group who's going to be causing trouble, whether it's collaborating with evil people, whether it's just not seeing the situation objectively, or whether it's wanting their own gain as opposed to in conflict with the well-being of the tribe. You've got greed, you've got power hungriness, you've got all of these things going on, and some of these characters, like the evil, treacherous bastards in the midst of the tribe, are often the worst villains, and they are so well done. One of the greatest things about this show is the actors, because the actors are so good, and the evil guys, the bad guys, you just come to hate these people because they are so evil.
Yes.
And
they lie to your face.
Right. And all of the worst aspects of an evil person, you find them in some of these guys. And that's kind of what makes it enjoyable, because these are actually really good villains. And sometimes there's an explanation for it. Sometimes they've been misled or manipulated, but sometimes it's just you just got someone that's pure evil. And those kind of people do exist. That's the thing, is that that's the thing that open Hollywood writers sometimes forget, is that there are real people on the earth who are just absolute sons of bitches.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if that's part of, I mean, just the uncomfortable, it's such an uncomfortable fact
Mm-hmm.
of life to know that, like, there's some people you just can't redeem.
Mm-hmm.
There's some people you just can't do anything with except put them in a hole somewhere and walk away.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really uncomfortable thing, because it undermines a lot of positions that, you know, people who are open-minded or open, let's say, it undermines a lot of positions or values that they have and ways that they think people should be treated and stuff. It's like, I mean, that might work for a lot of people, but not everyone. Because like you said, some people are just, you know, they're sons of bitches, and there's nothing you can do.
And like, we recently watched an episode that conveyed a lot of this in one of the evil characters from within the tribe, who after, you know, smiling and yesing his superiors who are trying to do the right thing, he goes into a full-blown narcissistic rage. And I thought, that's perfect. That's exactly what we understand dramatically reveals the truth of a lot of people in positions of power who aren't getting their way, and whose egos and whose self-importance and whose ambitions get threatened with the truth and with the kind of dynamics of healthy relationship building and constructive behavior. That's how they respond. But I did want to get back to the drama of the show, as you put it, Harrison, because there were so many, you know, as you were saying, there is so much about family dynamics and even secondary characters and major characters whose very human responses to the drama unfolding makes all of the heroics all the more believable and satisfying once those heroics, those actions, those triumphs are achieved. The viewer is earning those triumphs with the hero. The viewer is exasperated after many episodes of struggle and real deep internal struggle and strife to deal with the situation on a very personal level. And we're talking about tears. We're talking about prayers to do the right thing. We're talking about desperate anguish on the part of many of the major characters as they are facing these scenarios, one after the other in some cases.
It's a level of suffering that you just don't see anywhere else. It's so, it seems almost unending, which is, you know, pretty real.
Yes.
Because it never really ends. But you don't see that in, like, you know, superhero movies and the Marvel movies. Like, you just don't get that kind of deep suffering, that deep anguishing pain of, you know, wanting to do good and praying to God to help, to ask for guidance. You just don't get it. But when it actually comes to fruition and, like, it gets resolved, like, oh, it's so beautiful. And there's a particular story arc of a particular person that I'm thinking about right now, who, like, after, you know, all of this time of just, like, thinking the worst about this person, and oh my gosh, they were horrible. Oh, yeah. There's a redemption story that's so beautiful. It's so amazing and wonderful, and
yes.
I wanted to stand up and applaud at that moment, because it was just so great.
Because it's the way it's conveyed dramatically. Everything is earned. All of her struggles, all of her making amends with all of the family members, not to give too much away here, but when she finds it in her heart, and she too has to draw upon Ibn Arabi's assistance. When all of this happens, you are in some way experiencing this catharsis and this elevation, and that's something I haven't experienced in many shows or movies at all. And something else I wanted to add is that, we were watching the follow-up to Star Trek The Next Generation some time back, Picard. And the plot and the characters, there were some good ideas, but it didn't breathe. You were bombarded with plot point after plot point and ideas that, okay, now this is happening. Okay, now that's happening. And there was, unlike Resurrection Ertugrul, there was no, there was nothing that allowed you as a participant in this drama to breathe, to assimilate the developments that were going on. And it became less a journey than it was an effort to convince you that you were being told a good story.
Okay, several points I got to get through. One, nasty women. Because we're talking about the villains. This show has some amazingly nasty women.
Oh yeah.
Just the the best women villains ever. And again, I'll contrast this to Western narratives where, maybe there are some good female villains, but what I find in a lot of shows is that not just women, the characters are portrayed as, I'll use a nice word, I'll just say nasty. Nasty, but you're supposed to like them. People, basically they're unlikable people who are put in the position of being like your protagonist. So sometimes they might be redeemed, but sometimes that's just the character and you're supposed to like them even though they're pretty reprehensible as people. Again, that might have its place. I can see it working in some instances to get across that point, or just that there are, shitty humans out there. But it's almost in a lot of stories, it's presented as almost, if not ideal, just as something of a good thing. Whereas in this show, you actually, we've talked a bit about the variety of characters. You have characters like the one being referenced who, a couple of them, who you don't like, basically. You're watching it and you don't like this person for very good reasons, and then they go through a process and they actually find redemption. Then you have the just out-and-out, totally evil characters. Then you have some that are just a little less evil, who are still bad guys, but don't have the same level of mendacity and just outright evilness. And then you've got characters who are just maybe over emotional. They've got their own flaws that create conflicts in certain ways, and they're frustrating to watch. Those are the most frustrating scenes to watch for me personally, is you see someone just making a really dumb decision and just behaving like a total douchebag. And then you've got the characters who kind of are just genuinely decent people. They might be simple, they might not be very smart, and there's one character who's just great, who's not very smart, but who's just extremely lovable. And then you've got the smart people, and then you've got Ertugrul, who is really the he is the hero of the show. He's kind of almost this perfect being, but believable at the same time. I wouldn't say, maybe perfect isn't the way to put it. He's just the kind of guy that is a born leader and who has a good character and who has all the features of a person that you would admire in real life. He represents that class of people that anyone would admire who is around them, or any decent person, because there are a subset of people who will hate a person like that and want to tear them down actually because he's such a good person. So there's this range of characters that you don't find. The range in this show is greater than if you would take a whole number of Western shows and put them together, the range in Ertugrul between the characters is still greater than all the characters in all those other shows. There's just so much more depth. And I'll just give one example of the frustration of watching some of these characters. Like it's usually a young guy who is pretty much run by his emotions. And you can see this, and it's really frustrating to watch, right? Because the stakes are high. Because this is 800 years ago. This is like this medieval tribe that it's a very violent society, right? If you make a mistake, or if you just run into the wrong guy, bandits on the side of the road, you're going to get your head chopped off or something like that. So the stakes of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or of being accused of something, or being falsely accused of something, are very high. So you often see, often the young men who let their anger get the better of them and almost create like this catastrophe. Because of course, as the viewer, you know they're wrong. They're making a wrong choice. This one of the recurring kind of plot devices or storylines is this person who's falsely accused, right? So let's say someone dies, and even if there's just a small bit of evidence pointing towards someone as the culprit, this guy will latch on to that as evidence, and now he wants revenge. He wants to then kill this person who's either been set up or who is just a victim of circumstance. And watching these, like, the actors are great, right? So you see, and the reason it's frustrating is because it's so real, because you can see this in real life, how people get carried away by their emotions. But sometimes they might do bad things, but sometimes there might be a redemptive moment where they're actually shown that they're wrong, and they actually have to deal with the fact that they have made this huge error in judgment because they let their emotions get the better of them. And so that's why I'd call this is a form of magic, as Collingwood called it, because there is a moral to the story sometimes, a lot of the time, well, most of the time. There's a moral to the story. There's something that you can actually learn from, something that kids can learn from, to actually form their character from a young age, so that they see what justice is. They see what mistakes people can make by taking certain paths, by not looking at the evidence, by letting their emotions get the better of them, by leaping before looking. And it can reaffirm those values for someone that's a bit older than being a child. So there's just so much in it that is kind of, I'd say food for the soul, that is totally lacking. So this is coming back to this imbalance, where that's what's lacking even in these superhero movies, because in the superhero movies, there's nothing really in them that I would say, well, there is some. There's a little bit of good messages, of something that will actually reaffirm or create or instill the kind of values that go towards a virtuous character, forming a virtuous character, forming virtue within oneself. And this kind of provides that. This gets into one of my other points. Well, actually, on that subject of the range of characters, there's also, I mentioned how this is kind of a microcosm of life, because you see everything going on in this tribe, all the kinds of relationships. And so one of the great things really about the first season was there's a great love story to it. And it's not just a great love story, but within this microcosm, you have all of these relationships, and you see Ertugrul, and not just Ertugrul, you see men. I'd say you see what a real man should be by watching this show. Mm-hmm. And you see how a man can treat a woman, and in a positive way. Like, you see some really good examples of chivalry and intersexual relationships. And no, that's not I don't mean to imply something postmodern. Just relations between men and women, between women and women, between men and men, all different types of relationships in this show. You see how they can play themselves out, and you see positive examples of what's going on, and you see family. You see, like, when I said that Ertugrul is kind of like the epitome of this show, like he has all the good qualities. Not only is he a good husband, he's a good father, and he's intelligent, he's insightful, he's got depth to him. He's the one who can, while everyone else is maybe like looking. Oh, here's one scene, okay? they have a battle, they have a great victory, and his troops, his Alps, discover a bunch of booty, and of gold. And they're all happy. They're looking, oh, this is such a great haul. Look at all this money. I've never seen so much money. They're all smiling, and Ertugrul's looking at it, and he's got this serious face. And so they're all just seeing the gold. And he sees, this is actually from Ibn Arabi. I think in Ibn Arabi, he talks about like the left eye and the right eye, how we see in 3D because we have two eyes that are slightly off, looking at things from a different angle, and that's what gives depth perception. But in Ibn Arabi, there's another dimension to that. So one eye sees the surface narrative, and the other eye is what sees the unseen. It sees the hidden implications, or the context, or just the thing that the one eye on it by itself won't see. So everyone in this scene is all happy about this gold, and Ertugrul's got this serious look on his face. First of all, he's not letting the emotion of the crowd get to him. So he's demonstrating his own individuality, that he's not moved by or not controlled by the emotions of the crowd. He's his own person. And he's got this serious look on his face. And then he says, you know what this gold is? This is the gold that would have been paid for, to the mercenaries that kill our people, to the assassins and to the conspiracies and all this stuff against us. And so even though it's great to find all this gold and it can now be put to good use, he sees what it was for, and he sees kind of the unseen. So this is this example of the depth of perception that this character has that the others don't, and that's why he's their leader. That's why he is leader, is because they see that in him too, and then he can act as the both the lightning rod and as the exemplar for people to follow. He's the one that can set the tone for certain events. So when everyone else is freaking out, he can be the one that remains calm and says no, let's do this. Or if everyone else is saying, oh, this person's evil, he can say, no, let's calm down here and look at the actual evidence. This is this element of what I'd call the multi-levelness of the show, and this is that variety of humans, the depth and the range of human types and human reactions, is that you have very simple people, very simple reactions, all the way up to Ertugrul, who has this ability to see more and to react more and a greater depth of emotion. And then this, coming back to the microcosm, this has an effect in his relationships too. So he knows how to treat people. He is respectful to his wife. Might tease her every once in a while, but he's respectful to her, and he's respectful to his mother and his father. But at the same time, he's his own person, right? If something is wrong, he's not going to go along with something just for the sake of for the sake of anything. If he knows something is right or wrong, he's going to act accordingly. And also, he's a great father. One of the great things, I don't think I've seen this in any other shows, is such a positive depiction of fatherhood. Because, spoiler alert, he does have kids, and that's kind of the whole point of the story, because I don't think we mentioned it at the beginning. Ertugrul is the father of Osman, who goes on to found the Ottoman Empire. And again, both of those characters, both Ertugrul and Osman, are kind of historical black holes. Like, no one knows anything really about them with certainty. So again, wide open for interpretation. But in the one scene where Ertugrul first finds out that his wife Halime is pregnant, he's just he's so joyful, and you just don't see that.
He conveys heart.
Mm-hmm.
He conveys joy. He conveys empathy. Like you said, he can be the lightning rod, the center of the storm. He's quite often the one that knows exactly what the appropriate response is to a particular struggle or action. And I wanted to add that it's funny because we've been watching this program with a few other people, And if you've been conditioned to have a low attention span and thrive on the spectacle, then many of the reaction shots and the musical cues that enhance the drama of a particular interaction or a struggle or a conversation that's got all of this emotional and psychological weight, then, I've noticed some people get a little impatient with it. But I love it, because what it does is you're watching the faces of these actors, and you're clued in as to what they might be or must be thinking right at that moment. So there's all this metacognition of, there's you're realizing they're such good actors that on their faces, okay, that's what they're thinking in response to that character. So you have lines and lines and lines of script, of story, that's just told in how these characters are expressing themselves non-verbally, which is a big distinction. It's a big difference. Mm-hmm. And what the format of the show lends itself to, because there's so many episodes.
Which we may need to go ahead and just give a warning. If any of you all are thinking of watching Ertugrul, this is
kind of like a lifetime commitment.
It's a lifetime commitment. There's a serious number of episodes. What each episode, like proper episode, is 2.5 hours long, and there's something like 30 or something. So it's like the entire cinematic, like Marvel universe, like all 23 or those, however many of those movies. It's like all of those for one season of Ertugrul, which, I mean, it's great because it gives it so much room to just kind of play with different aspects of things, and it gives it room to breathe and to explore different avenues and different things. But at the same time, it's not something that you can binge watch.
Yeah.
Like ever.
No.
Yeah. And the thing of it is, it'll, so another kind of spoiler, but not a big one. Major characters die, sometimes tragically. Oh, yeah. And so even if you don't particularly like these characters, it's still, if you're even halfway invested in the show, it's painful. It's like, more than once I have caught myself go, oh my God, this is really terrible, because that the show is gonna go there. You're not just gonna see and experience the tragedy, but you are going to watch the responses of these very good actors very realistically convey their utter anguish and the very likely emotions that are going to arise out of it, and
that's a good point, because like like you were saying, this is 800 years ago. This is like medieval technologies. Like they're still doing bloodletting, which isn't necessarily bad or not a good thing to do, but it's a very primitive thing. So a cut, it can be dangerous. It can be deadly. So sometimes it's kind of silly the way they go over the top with certain incidents, but a lot of times, like it is deadly, and they don't know if someone's going to make it through. And like you said, they do kill major characters. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you don't know what the show's going to do.
Well, I want to get back to a point you mentioned a little earlier, because you said that it is like one part Young and the Restless. This is a soap opera in some ways, no question about it, albeit one of the best soap operas I think you're likely to see. But I would add also that in terms of the nasty women, the villains that have been created, who are sometimes women, even if it takes the format or the form of soap opera, more than once I was watching the high level of drama and thinking, Lady Macbeth, because it might not have the literary prose quality of Shakespeare, for instance, but everything else is right there. And in that sense, and you'd have to see it to understand, to experience it, I suppose. But there is this very high level of drama. And, we've watched a show and we've joked about the musical cues and the rattling of, the rattlesnake tail when an evil character comes into the scene. And there are these tropes about the tension being, ratchet up. And there are conventions that are kind of obvious and maybe even a little hokey. But there's so much else in this program that is of a higher level, that you forgive all these things, even the mistakes on the show, even the plot devices that were just, like, oh my God, that was what were the writers thinking there? That was really stupid. But there are enough of these other turns of the narrative and plot developments that are so well fleshed out from scene to scene to scene that you're dazzled a little bit, I think, by its by the fleshing out of the whole thing.
Yeah, and
it's refreshing.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's refreshing, and it's also novel, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, this isn't something I've never seen a show like this before in like the best way. And so it's good on those two levels where it's new and it's refreshing, and also just on its own merit, it's good. It takes what it does and it does it well. It's not perfect. I'm one of the people who's like, okay, we get it. You don't have to go through like every single person's face like 3 times before you move on to the next scene. But again, even without its without perfection, it's good.
But you know what, Adam? I want to comment on that for a moment, because we've all had experiences that were psychologically and emotionally intense, right? We've all had dramas in our lives that forced us, compelled us to face our weaknesses, confront others' weaknesses, situations that seemed a little hopeless and really challenging to us, that were novel. And what you get with this show, pretty much on every episode, is characters who are faced with, dilemmas that are, if not dilemmas that we've experienced personally, but that do convey that kind of people being brought to the limits of their being and having to make the choice in the moment of how to respond. And, like we were saying, the actors are so good on this show that you can't help get drawn in. You can't help watching them cry in slow motion after something horrible has happened and not feel some amount of pain. And, and next thing you know, you got tears running down your face. And, you marvel over how much better an experience it is of a hero's tale than what we've been used to for so long.
I think they all deserve an Oscar.
Yeah.
Each and every one of them. I don't know how that would work exactly, but they all need an Oscar.
Well, maybe we're going to wrap up in a couple minutes. I just want to make one final comment on Ertugrul as a character, and of course as the actor that plays him. I forget his name, of course. His first name looks like Engin, but I think it's Engin or Enyin. Not sure how to pronounce it. He's great. Not only is the actor great, but like we've all said, Ertugrul himself is just a great character. And one of the reasons that he's great is because he's he's not totally emasculated, like a lot of the depictions of fathers and men in TV in the West these days. But he is sensitive. Like, he's very emotional, not like hysterical or not overly emotional in the way I was describing the young men. He's got a depth of emotion, and pretty much all the characters at some point in the show will cry. So he's a well-rounded character. He's sensitive, but he's a total man. He is extremely, masculine. There are great masculine characters, just like there are great feminine characters. Like, so if you actually want to see a show with some real men and real women in it, this show has it. So, like I was talking about Odysseus and how he's a total badass. Well, Ertugrul's a total badass too. Like, this is one of the reasons. Well, this is a whole other subject, but we did a couple shows on Salafi jihadism, and one of the points that a lot of people, like looking at the rise of like hardcore Islamism, is that like in ISIS and things like that, is that brand of like religious ideology is filling a hole, and it's a very, what you might call, a live option for a lot of people that fills a hole that is lacking for a lot of people in Western cultures, a lot of Muslims in Western cultures. There is and was this kind of hyper masculine, like I'd say actually toxically masculine element in something like ISIS that is a draw for a lot of young men. And the good thing about this show is that it's not like that. It fills those holes, or it can fill those holes, those spaces that are lacking in what cultures can and should provide. But it actually puts something good in its place. Like I think Adam, earlier in the show, you talked about how this is a show about truth. Like, this is about truth and justice and goodness and what I'd call actually universally good qualities, no matter what the culture or what the religion is. So, as a Western Christian raised person, I can watch this show and totally identify with the messages of what's going on, because there's that element of universality in it, whether intended or not. It's there. You can watch the show and totally get behind Ertugrul just because he is this virtuous, like, badass man. And so if you want to, like, if you it's got the best of all worlds, basically. If you like watching superhero shows because you like watching, badass dudes kicking the crap out of bad guys, it's like you can get that too, but you can get it from a human that has, like, a human character that has some depth and something actually worth looking up to and worth trying to emulate in your life, to actually introduce and then manifest those virtues for yourself. And that's why too I think it's a good show. A good show for young people too, like it is designed for the family, because it has all of this. And again, just something that's pretty much lacking in most of the shows that we watch.
Well, I would just add that it's even on some level consistent with the thinking and writing of Ibn Arabi, who drew upon the ideals, the being of Christ and Moses and other religious figures. Sufism wasn't a exclusionary idea, but it also, I mean, yes, it forged its own path, but it wasn't so narrow that it couldn't recognize the greatness of being of other religious figures. And there are even moments in this series where Ertugrul says, he doesn't have a beef with Christians per se. He doesn't have a beef with other people of other faiths. He just recognizes that his own brand of Islam is his path, and would even seek to fight for justice for any of the oppressed in the lands that he is trying to liberate from oppressors. So
well, he does think that his religion is the best religion, of course. Like, Islam is the truth, but he has respect for Christians. So if he sees Christians being oppressed by other Christians, he will sympathize with those Christians. He'll still try to convert them to Islam, though.
Yeah, it's not a, but he's not on a kind of holy war to convert the world. He is.
Well,
Well, ideally he'd like people to follow in traditions that he believes in because it works for him. But I'm not convinced that, and he does want to unite the tribes, and that's correct. But I wouldn't say that he is. For instance, he used ISIS. It's not. It's
he's not going to convert people. He's not going to
ISIS.
convert people at the point of his sword, but he is out there to establish a world empire that will rule the world for Islam. Like, that's just part of the story. Just like if you were having a King Arthur show, like historically accurate, even if King Arthur wasn't real, there's an element of our religion is the best and we're going to bring it to the world. Like there is an element of, what do you call it? Proselytization. So, I mean, but it's not like that. I'd just say that doesn't detract from the show in any way, because Ertugrul is presented as a just person.
Mm-hmm.
So he's not going to forcibly convert anyone. He is going to present Islam as the best path, and he is going to get converts from the Christians, as he does in the show, and as happens with any religion in any historical situation. You have mass conversions going on like that. But but he is presented as a person of good character, and not as one of those convert or die type people.
And I would just say that is a version of Islam that we haven't gotten very much in Western movies and portrayals of Islam.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it exists, even though there is a very large percentage of people watching this show and having their natural moral taste buds fulfilled by this vision of a hero that is consistent with, it's like, well, what would a hero of Islam really look like? It's this guy.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, that's another reason I think it's a good show for the Islamic world too, because it shows a genuinely decent Muslim hero, and not like some I don't want to swear, some ISIS douchebag that you find spreading this kind of stuff. And Ertugrul is extremely popular. It was just in the last couple of years was translated into Urdu, so it's playing in Pakistan, and it's wildly popular over there. And of course, it's wildly popular in Turkey. But you will get these dumbass imams and stuff who come out with basically denouncing the show because maybe the women aren't covering their faces even though they're wearing headdresses, or they sometimes show the women's hair, or they've got just typically dumb reasons for not liking the show, not realizing that this is actually probably one of the best things that Islam could do for itself, not only for young Muslims around the world, but for the perception of Islam in the eyes of non-Muslims.
Yeah, there was something I wanted to get back to that you were mentioning as far as Ibn al-Arabi and kind of how it incorporates some of what he wrote about into the show, and that is. And it's something that came to my mind from one of the commenters on one of our other videos, who was talking about the evolution of consciousness. And, it got me thinking about it. And, there's a couple of different ways you could define what he's actually talking about as far as what kind of consciousness are you talking about, individual or collective? And then there's evolution. And what do you mean by evolution? Do you mean just a change, or do you mean an improvement upon? But what I was thinking specifically was how Ibn Arabi, at several points in the show, has mentioned this same story or allegory, maybe, of being it's always in response to Ertugrul going through some kind of great trial and tribulation, some great suffering that he just can't seem to break free from and can't seem to overcome. And he's just like, why is this, God help me, how do I do this? Why is this so bad? And Ibn Arabi's response is that, if you have a piece of iron, like it's kind of worthless. But if you take that piece of iron and you throw it into the fire, and then you hammer it out, and you throw it back into the fire, and then you hammer it some more, and then you throw it in the fire, and you hammer it out, and you just keep going through that process, what do you get? You get a sword. Something that can protect and defend. Something that can serve a great purpose, but had to go through immense suffering in order to be useful. And so in the same way, I think that is, kind of like what the soul is meant to do. It's meant to go through the trials and the tribulations. And I think this show does a fantastic job of just hammering that home of how you should respond to these kinds of trials and tribulations. You shouldn't respond to it by condemning the world and condemning God for it. It's to accept it and embrace it, because then you know that it's a lesson that you can learn and grow from. It's kind of like it's telling you what's wrong. It's telling you you're a little bit weak here and you need to grow. And rather than saying like, I'm perfect the way I am, you accept it, as painful as it may be, and you try to grow from it. And when you do that, guess what? You're not vulnerable to that anymore. Like, Ertugrul was vulnerable to certain, ploys and manipulations in the first season, which now he sees it from like 10 steps ahead. He's like, oh, I ain't falling for that no more. And that's great. And so when people talk about like evolution of consciousness and stuff like that, I think this is like one of the kind of concepts that would really accurately portray what that really means. It's not like something that everybody just, smoke a lot of dope and meditate and then you're going to be all happy and, perfect and whatever. It's like, that ain't going to work. That's not how it works. You have to actually face the suffering, face the suck, deal with it, and suck it up.
Yeah. All right. Perfect place to end. So check out Ertugrul. Enjoy.